One of the major things that the administration of Nigeria's new presidents will have to confront is the japa situation, or the brain drain, that has gained momentum in the past several years. While japa is nothing new, given the dimensions it has taken, the impact of this on the Nigerian economy continues to be a subject of discussion, all the way to the highest level of government. But what if there was a way for Nigeria to gain from the brain drain situation? PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, believes that placing Nigerians in high-end global value chains could propel the country towards achieving global superpower status in about 10 to 20 years. Instead of the brain drain, there should be brain exports, where exporting Nigerian brain capital means the country receives foreign cash inflow along with other value-adding benefits crucial for economic development. Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist and Partner, PwC Nigeria, joins me to look at how brain exports could grow Nigeria's economy. Dr. Nevin, welcome to Business Edge once again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's always great to be with Business Edge. Good to see you.
Thank you. So let's start off this in terms of the traditional path to development that many countries around the world have particularly followed. And that's a transition moving from agricultural production to some low value manufacturing and then going into higher value adding manufacturing. We've seen Taiwan, South Korea, China as well employ this to get their economic growth and development working. It's also been suggested as a path for Nigeria to follow. So let's start from there. Why is it not necessarily the path that Nigeria should follow at this point in time, given sort of the context of the Nigerian situation?
Well, to begin with, it's challenging for us to export these physical goods because we're really not competitive with it. I mean, we all understand here in Nigeria the issues we have around power, the issues we have around infrastructure, the issues around we have the port, particularly Apapa, issues we have with customs. So we're a long way from being able to export even low-end manufacturing goods. And yet high value services, brain power, we're already exporting. I mean, we already have companies like Outsource Global, founded by Amal Hassan, 1,500 people in Kaduna and Abuja, who provide high value services to companies in the UK, in Japan, in England, in the United States as well. So it's something that we can already do. And it's actually happening, even without PwC writing the paper or policymakers thinking about it, it's happening. I mean, you can see global companies like Microsoft and Google expanding tremendously in Nigeria because they recognize the talent pool and they're bringing their development centers here. We have a company like Tech Experts, which chose Lagos about 7 years ago to come, which is one of the world's major outsourcing companies. So it's happening already. And that path, from our perspective, just makes a lot more sense. The jobs are higher value added, higher wages, earn FX faster. I mean, if we have to look, for example, the Dangote refinery, I mean, we all give incredible credit to Mr. Dangote for his courage, but that refinery has taken over a decade to come to the stage it's at. It's not in production. It's taken $19 billion of investment so far, and it hasn't created any jobs apart from the construction jobs, and it hasn't earned any FX. But when we export brains, the cycle time is much faster, so people can enter these value chains in short periods of time. We can scale them quite rapidly, and it's already happening. And I had one estimate, I can't verify it, but I had one estimate that the number of people working in these remote value chains, global value chains remotely from Nigeria has grown from about 100,000 to 300,000 in the past 5 years through the COVID period, because of course, COVID made it easier to work remotely. So we really have an opportunity to say, let's export brains, let's not export low-end manufactured goods. We already have a comparative advantage in brains. I mean, we coined the term a few years ago, the barbell economy or the barbell export economy, because we export brains, which are the highest value added thing in the universe, and we export crude oil, which is the lowest value added thing. So our economy, our export economy at least looks like a barbell. But also, I mean, if we look at other industries, service industries, so not manufactured goods, Nigeria excels. I mean, we've got Tiwa Savage, WizKid, Burna Boy, Davido. In football, of course, football, you physically have to go there, but we have Awani, we have Eze, we have Ndidi, Oshiman. I mean, it's just Iheanacho. I mean, it's incredible the value that we're already exporting in these services. And the point that we've made in our paper and we're talking to people about is that's where we should focus our expansion. That will really help our balance of payments much more quickly than trying to expand low-end manufacturing.
Interesting. So one of the things I noted about this report was sort of a focus on the youthful population or the youth population of Nigeria, the average being about 19 years old. How does this in particular play into the brain capital approach that the report from PwC is advocating?
Well, I think one of the most important aspects of exporting brains while people stay in Nigeria, they don't have to Japa, is that people train themselves. I mean, the Nigerian young people are incredibly resourceful. So it's not a complex strategy. You just need to give them a few things. They find the training. They just need a device. They need some bandwidth. They need some power, not industrial sized power, but solar power to keep going and participate in these global value chains. And so that really takes advantage of our young population. I mean, you don't need a 40-year-old teaching an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old how to do IT. They teach themselves, and there's enough resources out there with the internet, certifications, Microsoft, Cisco, different languages on there. They teach themselves. And that's what's so powerful about this strategy. It happens at scale across the country. So I came in contact with a young man based in Kano who I called up because he, in fact, works remotely for a Canadian telecommunications company. So I wanted to, and he does some of their AI work. So how is it possible for someone in Kano to figure out how to enter a global value chain, get paid in US dollars, working for a Canadian company? And he told me his story. And that can be repeated everywhere. And of course, this is not just a story about Lagos. I mentioned Amal Hassan, whose company is in Kaduna and Abuja and is expanding to Gombe. We have more and more governors that are saying, actually, we want to export brains with our people staying in state. So Edo State has a big program. They're aiming for 35,000, and they've started. This is not a plan, it's an execution. They're aiming for 35,000 software developers in global value chains based in Edo State. Ekiti State is well down this path as well. And then there's a number of other governors, I'm sure, who are going down the same path. So the point is, it can be done across the country. People don't have to all come to Lagos and all the problems around infrastructure and crowding in Lagos. And if you take 35,000 per state, like the goal of His Excellency Governor Obaseki, I mean, that's over 1 million people inserted in global value chains. And of course, those who listened to His Excellency President Tinubu's inauguration speech yesterday may have heard he talked about 1 million young Nigerians in digital services. So yes. I think there's a confluence of events around the country to really understand the value for this and how it's a major part of our export strategy for Nigeria, and to really increase the well-being of young Nigerians and making it so they don't have to Japa to have a good life. They can be in Benin City, they can earn a good wage, they can buy their parents a home, they can buy themselves a car or a motorbike without having to leave Edo State.
And you make it sound really interesting. So this barbell approach or dumbbell approach that you mentioned earlier, because it was something that the report also looks at, the comparison between what crude oil has brought to Nigeria as an export versus what brain capital has brought as well. And some might ask, is it really possible to put these exports on a scale and really see which one has benefited Nigeria more? So in terms of highlighting sort of the benefits versus the black gold, which some have now described as a curse for Nigeria, what has that been? What did the report find in that comparison?
Well, I mean, the total amount transferred from the NNPC to the Federation account over the last decade, I think the highest was maybe 7 billion, 12 billion 1 year in the last 18 months. So in 2020, people need to understand, in 2022 and 2023, there has been no transfer from at all from NNPC to the Federation account. So effectively, oil is bringing us nothing. And the reason there's been no transfer is because of the collapse in crude production. I mean, it was 2.2 million barrels a day when I came to this country. It was 1.6 to 1.8 for many years, declined to 1.3, 1.2, hit a low of 1.0. And of course, we subsidized 650,000 barrels of crude. So right now, oil is giving us nothing, and we've made it compounded it with the foil subsidy. So we have the worst of all possible worlds: low oil production and a high oil price, and the foil subsidy combining together. So there's no value going to the Federation account right now from oil. Whereas we already know from remittances, which is a form of brain exports, of course, we're earning over $20 billion a year. And in terms of brain exports where the people stay in Nigeria, so what we're advocating, I mean, if we look in the case of India, they export $200 billion worth of services a year. It's extraordinary. They're about 7 times the population. That's where we should be aiming to be. So that would be $30 billion a year. Now, I think we can do it. We put a kind of 10 to 15-year horizon in the paper we did, but that would immediately fix our balance of payments problem if we address that. And it's what we're competitive in. I mean, as I said, we're competitive in music, we're competitive in Nollywood, we're competitive in financial services. UBA has just announced that 50% of its profits came outside of Nigeria. Access is marching across the continent. We're competitive in these high-end services. So we should be putting people in every sphere of the global value chains. And with COVID, we understand more that this is possible. There were jobs that we thought could not be done remotely are now done remotely. So Amal Hassan's company, they export legal services, they export accounting services, they export BPO services, call center services, software development services. AI services. So it's more and more possible to do it kind of across the gamut of jobs. And that's where we should be focused while we still have these bottlenecks. Now, over time, if you look in the case of India, they started with a service export orientation in the 90s. Now they're starting to become a manufacturing powerhouse as well as they've solved their infrastructure and logistic problems. We may go down the same path. But when we look at the facts on the ground and we look at the success that Nigeria's already had in exporting high value services, we say this has to be the strategy. We are not going to be competitive in exporting low-end manufactured goods for quite some time. So why would we go down that path when it's going to take too long, given the pressures we have on it, when we're already have a comparative advantage in the high-value services?
And absolutely, I think you're opening some people's eyes to sort of the flip side of how the japa, the brain drain situation can be made positive for Nigeria, also with some internal restructuring and work. But Andrew, I can't have you join me on a day like this, the day after President Tinubu gives his inaugural speech, and not touch just on one or two things. And in his speech, as you mentioned earlier, the president did touch about what would be his economic thrust: 1 million jobs through the digital economy, removal of the fuel subsidy, better electricity, and much more. And so while we're expecting more details on how his administration plans to do this, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you make of the things he chose to focus on his very first speech to Nigerians as president. He's also president at a very, very difficult time in the country's history, limited spending room, massive borrowing and debts that has crippled many things as well. So what do you make of his first speech and the economic things he chose to touch on?
Well, I think a lot of these things, of course, we've been talking about for some time, for almost a decade. So the foil subsidy is something I think, and of course, all three major presidential candidates were saying the same thing, and we all understand it has to go on that. So the president, Tinubu, His Excellency, is courageous, standing up and saying we're doing that. The FX regime, I think we all understand it's basically a source of corruption. A few favored people get access to the FX, and it's crippling the economy, crippling investment into this country. I mean, we wrote the paper on this back in 2017. We said we would never get enough foreign direct or enough investment at all, whether it's foreign direct investment or Nigerians investing, without a liberalized exchange rate regime. That's come to pass. That will be changed. But I think what the president didn't address really is the cost of governance. I mean, we had the Orange report in 2013. His Excellency President Buhari assented to it in March of 2020, just as COVID was coming, or maybe April, but there was no action on it, on that. And I think that right now we continue to have too many things that are spending, particularly by the federal government, that are wasteful. So we have Ajaokuta Steel, which, in the 8 years of the Buhari regime, never produced any steel, continues to consume resources. We have the 3 state-owned refineries, which were promised to come on stream, continue to consume resources. We have now Nigerian Air consuming resources. So I think that there has to be some acknowledgement of, in a way, I look at the foil subsidy and the FX regime as almost the easiest decisions, really taking on the complex, costly governance that we have. And it's not just the cost of it, but it's also the difficulty it has in kind of doing business and running your organization, running your state, when there's so many different MDAs involved on that. And of course, we have this myth in Nigeria that's being promulgated by some of the international agencies that we're a low tax environment. We keep repeating 6% tax revenue GDP, but of course that's absolutely not true. In fact, we're a high tax environment. If you look at the telecommunications sector, for example, there's about 40 different taxes, levies, and fees that apply to that industry at the state level, at the national level, the multiplicity of agencies on that. So one of the things that was encouraging in President Tinubu's speech that people haven't really focused on was he did say we would address this multiple taxation industry issue. And of course, it's not just for the formal sector. In fact, in many ways, the informal sector, we think of it as not being taxed, but it's worse because in these informal organizations, so markets, Okada drivers, et cetera, they're subject to daily fees by non-state actors that are very expensive for them. So that makes it very difficult as well. So I think that addressing the cost of governance, really having some courage to simplify the administration of the federal government in particular, reduce the number of MDAs, eliminate agencies that don't add any value, bring agencies under a ministry to streamline the way the operations do. I think that's the hard work. As I said, I actually think the foil subsidy and the FX changes are, in a way, easy one-off decisions that will bear quite quick fruit. I mean, already we've seen Eurobonds, Nigerian Eurobonds increase in price yesterday after the president's speech, so a positive sentiment there. But it's really the hard work of improving governance while reducing the cost of governance and showing Nigerians that they can get value for their money so that when they pay tax, it's not going into a steel plant that's not producing steel, it's not going to a refinery not producing refined product, it's not going to an MDA adding no value or negative value to the country.
All right, and I know we're going to be all keeping a very close watch on the next few moves that the president makes in the next coming days and weeks, as well as announcements of his economic team as well. So that's a conversation we'll be touching base with you again, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist and Partner at PwC Nigeria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. See you soon.
All right, see you soon.